And welcome to our usual Friday, 4 p.m. Central Eastern Time Grad Clinic. I have a great session lined up for you today. You're going to want to stick around because I'm going to give you some of my top tips on how to present with confidence and ease and what you really need to know as your central ingredients to craft a winning presentation that's going to create a memorable and lasting impression on your audience and convey the messages that you want. As ever, we've got time to take on board some of your top questions from this week. So I always want to leave that space for you. Pop those questions into the chat, and I will be sure today to cover them because we're going to have a little bit of extra time because the mini training is going to go a little bit short. Got great feedback last week after we had our mentor session. Check that out. And I hope some of you did have a chance to think about if you wanted to publish in the next 3 months, what would be the fastest way for you to do so? How would you do it? What approach would you craft? And do you have a mentor, somebody in your corner who can help you take the shortcuts so that you don't spend endless time spinning your wheels, going in circles, and not doing the things you have to do to get to where you really want to go in your career? And in that case, for many of you, that is publishing in high impact journals to get to the next level. I just want to remind you, especially for some of our new members in the group, the reason I created this platform, Fast Track Grad, and with it the Fast Track Academy, is because this is support that I really wish I would have had as a grad student. I remember when I was sitting in your shoes with my back against the wall as a grad student, I felt so much pressure. I felt so overwhelmed. I even ended up dropping out one term because it got to be too much for me. And it was only when I really connected to the right support along the way and got the support and guidance I needed that I really began to thrive as a student. And flash forward now, over the years of my time, having been a professor at Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, and now University of Bocconi Milan, I've taken the time to really learn why is it some grad students thrive and others don't. What is it that, for grad students who are equally intelligent, why do some get ahead and get on the fast track and others fall behind? And I want to unlock those secrets and make them open access to you in this community. So let me dive straight in when talking about presentations, because presentations is something that it can fill a lot of people with dread. It can trigger a lot of performance anxiety. It can trigger imposter syndrome and a lot of the mindset challenges that you may face as a grad. It's almost as though in that moment, getting in front of everyone and feeling that everyone is judging you, it lays bare and exposes any of those inner mindset weaknesses that you may have. So my first thing, before you ever try to craft a presentation, something you should do at any time is if you have ever had those feelings like you don't belong or you're inadequate or you felt like a fraud, those telltale signs of imposter syndrome, watch our videos and our training guides on imposter syndrome. You want to nip that in the bud to make sure that you're feeling good and you're feeling confident and that it's clear to you and not just something that you think, but something you genuinely believe in your core that you deserve to be where you are, that it is your rightful place. So deal with those mindset issues because that's a hurdle to overcome at any time, but especially when given a presentation. The second thing is really going to help you to prepare for a presentation is just like with publications. You need to clearly define your message. You want to define what it is you want your audience to take away from you. And sometimes that can even be subtle. It can be what you want out of it. I often encourage my students to think about when they go present at a conference that this is marketing. Right? Sometimes they think, oh, well, I'm going to go present at the conference to get really good feedback on my paper and improve it. I encourage them to think of this is your chance to actually go show off and attract the interest of some people in the field to know how strong you are. You have to think of it with a bit more showmanship. So really think about that. And I encourage my students, especially at conferences, not to go so much with the idea of, oh, I just want to get feedback on my work, but to go, oh, I want to strategically network with people in my field. This panel is very important to me and I want to be seen as a player here. And I want to present not my weakest studies that are not developed and I need support on, but I want to present my strongest ones. So I'm posturing myself as a rising star in the field. And that's really important to just know going in, if you're define what your success looks like. so that when you go in, you know what's going to come out. I remember when I was on the speaking circuit, I used to define my success was, if for every talk I give, because I really wanted to spread my work, I wanted to open up options for consulting. I wanted to really promote my team and the research we were doing. I saw it as marketing, and I judged my talk as a success if I got invited to at least one additional high-level talk. And be careful when you start defining your success in these terms, because I soon found myself living on a plane, doing crazy travel legs from New Zealand to China to California and then back to India. So careful what you wish for. You can be a victim of your success. But you definitely, so take the time to know, why are you giving this talk and what do you want to get out of it? And for some of you, that talk might be, if it's a safe space, right? My students I have in the program, we often do mock talks. And that is then a safe space to where we're doing the talk. And what you want to get out of that particular purpose is really to practice and feel good and confident and develop some muscle memory and flow for when it's the real thing. So once you define that success, then I proceed and I take presentations using a two-stage method. And so often I see people constructing their talks and they just dive straight in and they're like, I'm gonna start putting together slides and making it look nice. And they end up getting on one side a bunch of shiny gobbledygook that doesn't make sense. And then the other side, I see people, they really know what they want to say, but it looks like, kind of like when I try to draw, like a 4-year-old with a crayon put something together, and the slides look horrible. And so they would have almost been better working without a slide. And this is really important, because this is going to, if you get this right, those are obviously two extremes. But I want you to avoid that. And especially I want you to avoid the problem when people don't have real clarity on what they want to say or do. That, and you've all been there and probably seen this, is when somebody's just looking at their slides when they're presenting and reading what's on the slide. That's the worst. I don't ever want you to do that. So when I say a two-stage process, I want you to take it, just like it sounds, in 2 steps. The first step is I want you to get real clarity on what your message is going to be. What do you want to say? And I'm going to tell you in a second kind of the general structure you can have for that. Once you have that content down in your mind, clearly laid out, I sometimes write my talk as a series of bullet points, just like I'm writing paper. I have my notepad and I jot it down. Once you have that down and you have that content in place, that is the time to then transpose it and start transforming it into slides and visuals to make it simple and easy to follow. But make sure that you have your story straight first, or you're going to end up losing a lot of time trying to create slides that might not be coherent, might not have a flow. And the way I think about a presentation and designing the content is a bit like if you're inviting somebody over to your house for a cup of tea. And if you do that, what's going to happen? They're going to walk up to their front door. They might ring the doorbell or knock. You're going to answer the front door. You're going to greet them. You're going to take them inside, and you're probably going to say, "Oh, we're going to have tea here." They're probably going to want to see the house, and you're probably going to say, "Oh, well, let me show you around." And you'll walk them through maybe the living room or sitting room, and then you might take them through to the bedrooms. You might show them what the back garden looks like, and finally you'll come to where maybe in the kitchen or where you're going to have your cup of tea, and then you might complete your tour at the end, and take them back at the very end to the front door where you started, and say goodbye and part ways there, and they will leave knowing what was inside your house, having had that grand tour. They will leave, not having known anything, but by the end, knowing what was there. And that same process is exactly what you want to do when you construct your talk. So I think about this, if you think about the house analogy, really there's a few key components, and this draws on a model from Aristotle of persuasion, that really a good talk, it needs to have 3 central ingredients. And I'm going to show you where these ingredients, we want to pepper those in this model of this house analogy, and those are the logos, the ethos, and the pathos. So logos, ethos, and pathos. And broadly, the logos is the part a lot of people focus on, and that's kind of the intellectual component. It's kind of the meat of your talk, maybe like where you're sitting and having tea. It's kind of where you're really conveying the intellectual information and content that you want to transmit. And maybe talking about your research, going in depth about your results and your findings. But there's more to it, because right, to really open people up to receive that kind of deep, cognitively demanding information. They need to be receptive to it. And so you need the two other components from Aristotle before they're ready to receive that information. And one of those is the ethos, which is really your profile, who you are. Why should they listen to you? Why are you qualified to have that conversation? I mean, even here, I introduced at the beginning of this talk that I'm Professor David Stuckler, and I've taught at many big universities. You guys watching will know that I know a thing or two about this area, and maybe it's worth listening to me. And you see I sprinkled some ethos in at the beginning of this talk when I talked about how I had given very many talks along the way and traveled around. All those things contribute to ethos. They are telling your audience who you are and why they should listen to you. But the third element is really important as well. And I think sometimes in science, we tend to neglect this, and that's the pathos. And that's really an emotional component to really open up people's hearts to the message that you want to transmit. And that pathos is, not always so easy to do. And it's like that little extra that separates a good talk from an outstanding one. And you'll see one area where I will say I'm not always a fan of the TED Talk formats, but you'll see many of the good presenters. They do have these ingredients. And this pathos is often something they'll start with as an introductory anecdote or a hook that really establishes, much like an introduction in the paper, why do we need to have this conversation now? Why is this issue so important? And I really, really like using even a very short anecdote. Think of that as like your front door of your house that people see when you greet them, that draws them to come in. And then often at the very end of your talk, you might link back and leave on an emotional note. And sometimes for me, that might be telling a story that puts a human face on big data, which are otherwise a lot of big data points. For some of you, that might be talking about some of the challenges to get an issue on the agenda. Many of you are taking on the topics you've chosen for a reason, because you're very passionate about them, and I love that about members of this group. That you have many of you have fantastic topics and are hugely motivated by trying to serve those less fortunate and be a voice for the voiceless in society, and use your research skills to make the world a better place. This is your opportunity, often in a presentation, to even just in passing, it might even only be 30 seconds to a minute, open people up with those emotional nuggets. And I wouldn't feel bad about doing that or lose sight of that. And you will be amazed at the impact you can have by injecting a bit of pathos into your talk. So I like to, my structures, actually, I like to start with the pathos. Then I usually, at the front door, you're going to greet somebody of your house and say who you are. Build up some rapport and trust with your audience. That really needs to be early on in your talk. So you do need to introduce who you are up front and early. And then and only then you really want to get into that logos, the meat of your talk. And that often will then, at that point, that can follow a very quite rigid scientific structure where you might go through your methods and then your findings and try to tell the story of your data. One other footnote I want to give to this. When you get into the intellectual findings of your data, try to show and not tell. Try to show as much as you can. And this is something you should be doing in all good science and in your research paper as well. Try to show a few really compelling figures. And what I like to do is I like to have the main points. And if I have more complexity to get into, I have stacked a healthy appendix of slides so that if I have questions and answers, I can get into that detail if people want that detail. But you really want to know your audience and get the level of detail right. And one thing that's frustrating for an audience member is if they look on a slide and they don't understand something and you've kind of breezed through it too quickly. That can be incredibly infuriating, incredibly frustrating, and you've lost them. It's like you were taking them by the hand through the house, and you're like, oh, and over there somewhere is the bathroom, and they're kind of going and looking for the bathroom, and you've moved on to the next room, and suddenly they're lost in your house. They don't know where you just went. Keep them with you. Don't lose that flow. And sometimes I think there's a tendency when people get nervous to really speed up and go through things quickly, especially if you know there's a time crunch for your talk. And so I want to talk about, if you can master these ingredients, the pathos, ethos, and logos, and think about you're taking people by the hand and guiding them through your house, I then want to talk to you about how can you deal with these challenges of really feeling nervous or on the spot. And this can be really hard if English is not your first language. The first thing I'd say is practice. You need to practice. Like any skill, riding a bike, right? First time you ride your bike, you fall off. It's the same thing here. You need to practice, and you'll develop muscle memory. So especially if you've practiced several times, I don't want you to verbatim memorize your talk. So get it straight. But I would want you to maybe just when you have the initial hit of anxiety spike at the very beginning, maybe the first part of your talk, that's one where you might want to rehearse and have really well-crafted execution of your story and in introducing who you are. That can be important. After that, ideally, the nerves, your adrenaline spike will start coming down, and then you can develop into your flow. Then in terms of your outliner slides, I don't want you to memorize them, but I do want you to memorize where you're going, so that you could imagine, you could close your eyes and say, and kind of know what your outline is going to be. Know where your drive, kind of know it's like, no, I'm going to go to the living room, then I'm going to go to the sitting room, then I'm going to go to the garden, then I'm going to go to the kitchen. I want you to know kind of your outline transitions in your head, because when people don't know their outline transitions, that's often when they're having to look at slides. Oh, where am I in my talk? And you can always tell when they're not thinking through their talk, but they're just kind of like, they're just kind of looking. It's like the slides are driving the talk, not the speaker. And you want to command and draw attention to yourself. So memorize the transitions. It's almost like memorize the outline. And I find that to be incredibly effective, so that you know where you are in your talk. Of course, if you get lost, the slides can be a crutch. But I want you to make those slides so simple that also that people are looking at you and using the slides as background, and not that the slides are the foreground and then you're kind of on the sidelines in the shadow of the slides, if that makes sense. And you'll notice that a really good speaker will draw and hold on to your attention more than the slides. So you're winning the more time people are looking at you than when people are looking at their slides or their phones or something else. So those are my tips. If you get these things right, master the house analogy, master the logos, the ethos, the pathos, and you master your mindset and do your preparation and practice and homework, you too will begin to give killer presentations that are going to make you run the risk, like I did, of being invited over and over and over to give talks, and your family's going to get mad because you're spending your Friday nights in airports. So do be careful. Okay, with that, I do have time to take some questions this week, and I want to give you guys a chance in the chat. I'm just going to myself pop into the chat here and give everybody a warm welcome. There we go. Everything's looking good here. Do let me know. Let me turn the sound off so it doesn't bleed back in. Let me know if you have some questions this week that you've been struggling with. We've been doing a lot in the group this week, working on systematic reviews, working on some natural experiments, helping people iron out some of their inclusion-exclusion criteria, get really good with reference managers, some challenges that they're having exporting references from, say, Web of Science into Mendeley and other different reference software. So there's a lot of different areas. I mean, this is really your opportunity to get immediate help and see some of the principles of our simple writing methods put in practice on your papers. If I'm just checking the chat, one of the things I said on presentations, the presentations, I just want to come back and highlight that these are kind of the same principles that you want to highlight and do. Some people have asked me about interviews, and really the same principles on presentation are going to go for your interview. You again, want to leave people with an impression of you in your job interviews. And that takes a lot. Some people I've seen just stumble into job interviews and they haven't really done their homework or prepared. The difference with a presentation and a job interview is the job interview, you would do a lot of homework on who's going to be there. What are their interests? What are their fears? What do they like? And what do they absolutely hate in the field? A lot of the stuff is you can find public information by simply reading their published papers when it comes to an academic interview. But even a job interview, these are things that you can very readily do. Fernando's got a question that I want to bring on. How much time do you usually budget to prepare for a presentation? So that's a really good question. And I think, so I'll say, I like to give presentations that don't last more than 20 minutes. In fact, you can see my overview here was really me sharing with you our model for giving good presentations. That time went about 15 to 20 minutes. I really find I like that. That's kind of the sweet spot. It's also what you'll see in a lot of TED Talks, that they're a bit shorter and a bit punchier. And people really, think about some of the last talks or even classes you've sat through. People can really, in their mind, hang on to about 3 to 5 main messages, not a whole lot more. So I like, when possible, giving talks for that 20-minute window. So assuming that that's the case, the time you budget is really going to depend. So if you're not very good with slides, it could take you a long time, that step. So talking about the 2 steps. So the first step, if you've already done the research to get your story right and lined up and in place, it depends. If you haven't written up your research article yet, that could take a lot of time for you to define and set out. If you've already written up your research, suppose you already have a complete research article, you could potentially whip together your story, on the back of an envelope. And I'm very guilty of waking up in the morning the day of a presentation and putting things together rather rapidly, or doing on the plane to go give a talk, putting together the slides and the presentation. Here's my rule of thumb. For an hour of lecturing, that is completely new. I spend between an hour of lecturing, completely new, and I want to do it really well. I will spend about 3, but on a topic I already know, right? I have the knowledge for. I will spend about 3 to 5 hours presentation. If I already know the topic and everything's lined up, I can almost even do the presentation probably off the cuff even, but I have experience. So I would say for a 20-minute standard presentation, if you're doing it for the first time and you're inexperienced with slides and you really want to hit it out of the park, but you got your research done, I would budget spending at least 2 to 3 hours to prepare. And to really get good at it, I would give yourself the opportunity to practice your intro and your conclusion at least 2 to 3 times. And I know it's painful, this part. And I'll say it's so painful that I didn't even do it myself. But you want to record yourself and watch it back. It's horrible. Absolutely, I know nobody wants to do it. In fact, the way I got around it is I got invited to talks that were then filmed and put on YouTube and other venues, and I forced myself to watch those. But in preparing for a presentation, I can never bring myself to do it. So I hope you do better than me and you actually film yourself and watch it back. For a lot of people, it's incredibly painful because you're seeing all your weaknesses laid bare. But I really encourage you to do it. It will give you more command over your voice. It will give you more control. It will help you to understand some of your gestures as well, that you may not realize that you do every day, but you don't ever realize what they look like. The gestures that might look different. Like for me on this camera, it's backwards. Like a gesture like this will open up space. A gesture like this will close it down and be narrower. To begin to sync your gestures in the talk, you've got to watch yourself. And you've got to kind of be more consciously aware of things you've done and maybe even tics you have that you didn't know about. I know some girls might play with their hair or have a habit of their hair moves into their mouth, hair goes back. And I remember one of my students had this habit of hair was in mouth, out of mouth, in mouth, out of mouth. I'm like, And I was like, listen, we've got to work on this. And she had no idea she was doing it until we filmed it and brought it to life. I'm in Italy. The Italians, right, when they speak, the cliche is really true. Like there's like "Mamma Mia," there's like hands going everywhere, and the hand gestures are moving with the rhythm, and we had to work on that for international audiences. And it's not to say one way is better, but it was more to get you in control to where you're syncing up your voice, your body language with your message to really fire effectively. So yeah, Fernando, thanks for sharing that. I think that was a really good question. I hope that helps answer it for you. Um, and I do have some slide templates that I use that have been very helpful for me in presentations. And once you've developed those, you can use them over and over and over again without having to spend too much time prepping. That's a very good idea to start with being more confident. Yeah. Start with being more confident is in general working on your mindset, because this is something that doesn't really, it comes natural if you have a false sense of bravado. If you're like Don Quixote and you're just charging in and you're about to go get crucified, most of you will realize this can be daunting, because often you might be giving a talk where it's easier to give a talk when you know vastly more than people in your audience. It's much harder when there could be people, maybe you're a master's student giving your first talk at a conference, and people in the audience could know more about the topic than you. That's daunting. That is very daunting. So ABC is there to keep you calm and make sure you don't miss out on anything important. I'm not really sure. I may be dense here. I'm not sure what you mean by ABC. So let us know what you mean by that. Let me come back to this other good question. What if it's a QA form of an interview? How would you react to a question you were unprepared for? Do you have okay, now I see where the ABC came from. Or do you have an analogy or abbreviation for when the adrenaline spike hits? When working at the emergency room, we had ABC. So that's I'm really glad you mentioned that, because this happens quite commonly. You're in an interview. Somebody asks you a question and catches you flat off guard, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, and you think in your mind like almost like, oh shit, I don't know the answer to this. Sorry for my language, but you're kind of, and you don't want them to see that, so you're kind of putting on a brave face. So you want to buy yourself some mental time very quickly. And in this, even milliseconds can count to collect your thoughts and outline a coherent answer. So what I like to do if I'm feeling nervous to calm myself down is I do use some fillers. I say, oh, that's a really fantastic question. I'm glad you asked about, and then say whatever they asked about. And you've just bought yourself maybe 5-10 seconds to think. And what you can also say, and don't be afraid of, is to say, I don't know. When I was just starting out, I don't know, I felt was just admitting, oh, I'm so weak, they're going to find out I'm a fraud. My imposter syndrome would come out. Now, I say, I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that, but I can find out for you. More than ever as a professor, because I know what I don't know. I know what the limits of my knowledge are. So if there's a question you're completely unprepared for, and you do know the answer, then you might want to take a moment with those fillers to collect your thoughts and construct in your mind an answer, instead of a nervous answer that's just kind of going in circles, going all over the place, and makes you look bad. So take your time there. If it's an answer you're not prepared for and you genuinely don't know, I would just say that. And Frank, in most cases, there's no shame in that, and they will respect you more than rather than trying to waffle an answer that you don't know about, and they're going to see that you really don't know what you're talking about. I hope that helps. Okay. Right. Yeah, that was the previous message, the first one. And over time, those I don't really think the adrenaline ever goes away. You want the adrenaline, but with practice, you get used to it, and you can leverage that adrenaline to channel your energy more positively. Rather than feeling overwhelmed, by nervousness. This is kind of adrenaline not functioning in a healthy way for you. You want that adrenaline to give you energy, to give you fuel for the showmanship and the craft that you're going to put on in your presentation. So really, thanks for that question. I think I'm looking on the phone because Facebook hides the names. I think, Philip, that might have been you. I can't see here. Let me see if the live chat, if I can see. Okay. No, I can't. Yeah, Philip. Yeah, exactly. I thought that was you. So that's a good question. And Nehal, your point about being more confident at the start is really helpful. So we have a couple more minutes. If there are some other questions, I mean, one other thing I want to say too about this confidence issue is, and I don't know if I can describe this wholly the way I did it, but I would often before a presentation have a routine to get me in the zone. Because if you're going to go give a talk, sometimes before, you might have to upload your PowerPoint, and there could be a hiccup, something's not working correctly, or a lot of people want to talk to you. And I would often, very simply, just excuse myself and disappear and say I had to go to the bathroom, even if I didn't have to go to the bathroom. But it just gave me a moment to be alone, to kind of close my eyes, mentally go through my outline for a second, and to relax myself and gain control of the adrenaline spike, especially if you feel like boom, 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 heart is going, can't breathe. I remember that. I suffer from asthma, and so I used to feel like puff an asthma inhaler. That wasn't really the best thing because it actually sparked my heart rate even more. But I learned that to really control my heart rate, control my breathing, get me feeling more calm and composed. A little bit of time alone, closing my eyes, walking through the outline for a second, thinking through the first words I was going to say, visualizing, like many athletes do, the performance, and finally, to relax myself, closing my eyes and trying to visualize a green dot. And that's what worked for me personally. I'm not saying it's going to work for you necessarily, but that's helped me from the time that kind of pre-talk ritual, pre-presentation ritual, pre-interview ritual has helped me from the time I gave some of my first talks to giving talks to more than 10,000 people all over the world. So I hope, guys, you can take into account some of these tips and begin to apply them for your interviews, your presentations, to help you deal with performance anxiety and really help you to do your best when it counts. And there's huge value in science overall in being able to sell and market your ideas. It is a marketplace of ideas, and it's not always just the best ones that win out, but sometimes it's the fierce and most vocal advocates of those ideas who end up getting money, persuading policymakers to invest in areas of research, and ultimately have more successful careers and get more opportunities. It's a softer side of science, but I really want you guys to begin to invest in this. Invest in these skills for yourself. They're going to help you enormously when you're on the job market to outcompete others for those higher positions. And speaking of putting these principles in practice, early in the new year, I have an interview for a multi-million-dollar grant coming up, and this is the same mode of preparation that I'm going to go through. So, guys, really fantastic to connect this week, and I look forward to seeing you as ever at our usual time here every Friday, 4 o'clock. We're going to take on a topic that you bring up. This is really your time for us to give you immediate support. So, I'm grateful for several of you who have been asking me for some additional training and presentations. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I'm going to look forward to seeing you next week on Friday. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend, and we'll be in touch as ever in the DMs. All right. Bye for now, everyone.